police. Not until I am dead can I escape these walls. To anyone who thinks they have the capacity for murder, I urge you to think again. My life is an impoverished nightmare. Let it be a lesson to you. This is a quote by Archibald Hall, also known as the Monster Butler and Scottish serial killer. That is who we will be discussing today. Before we jump into this case, though, just a few housekeeping items. In the pinned comments down below, you will see a comment from me where I will list 3 cases that I am interested in covering, and I would like you to vote on which one sounds the most interesting. And then, if you have not already done so and feel comfortable doing so, if you are able to like, comment, and or subscribe, I would greatly appreciate your support. Okay, so let's talk about who this Scottish serial killer was. There is a certain degree of grace and elegance one looks for when hiring someone to clean and take care of their home. The professional resume of a butler usually speaks volumes of their work history, how well composed they might be, and why they are the correct candidate for a particular job. When hiring somebody, especially to work in your home, it's hard to imagine hiring a certifiably insane person. But when you don't have real references to call upon, it is entirely possible to employ someone who is mentally defective. A bit of charisma and cheery personality can get someone very far in life, especially if they are trying hard to impress. For a psychopath, it is nearly human nature to act in such a way. While imagining cutting off your head, they might be telling you about the way in which to wash a dish properly, and on their face, a perfect grin. So the psychopathic tendencies of Archibald Hall would reveal its ugly face early at the age of 16. He had been seduced by a much older and wealthy woman, and Archibald was awestruck when this woman would take him to expensive dinners, large public functions where he was able to consume very high quality alcohol and experience lavish lavish hotel rooms. He was in this phase of life at a very young age, however, where he was taking in the decadence of fine living. Archibald realized in this time that this was the kind of life he wanted to live. He would do anything it took to be able to attain this dream. Now, Archibald had come from a poor but decent, hardworking family. He was not used to the beauty and decadence this lifestyle he would experience later on would offer, like the sparkling of chandeliers or glamorously decorated opera houses. Archibald would soon understand while sipping pink wine at a gala was that what he wanted, others had. And for him, the only way to get what he wanted was to take it from others. The first of many cruel deeds that Archibald had committed was cheating out the Red Cross. Wandering the streets of Glasgow with 2 tins in his hands, he asked the public for money, which would graciously be accepted by the Red Cross. Any donation was fine, but of course larger bills were preferred. Archibald would say in a perfectly empathetic tone. At the end of the day, the tins were emptied by Archibald, who would take all of the large bills and left only pennies for the Red Cross to collect. He came to grasp this idea that he could steal without conscience, especially from the truly needy. This awareness moved him so greatly, he was willing to commit any crime as long as his hands would be filled with the money he felt he had a right to. Archibald proved to be a master of manipulation and greed, but had not become a fully successful criminal yet. He would meet his first brush with police at the age of 19 while breaking into homes and dealing with petty theft. After his arrest, he was judged mentally unstable. He would be sent twice to mental hospitals and would escape each time. 1 year later, he was told by a court of law and psychiatrists that he was certifiably insane, but this really did not faze him at all. He continued on with his dream of gleaming champagne glasses and just immersing himself in this lavish, glamorous world he had been exposed to in his teens. If he was to go back to that wealthy lifestyle, however, he had to find a way in legally. Throughout the 1940s to the late 1970s, Archibald was in and out of jail for various crimes basically every single time he got caught and landed himself in jail. Turning from the seduced to the seducer, Archibald sought wealth from both men and women, betting them for the night and then disappearing with their money before the sun came up. However, despite getting away with this, the money was never enough to satisfy him with what he really wanted, and that was to become a proper gentleman. His undying wish was to be wealthy enough, or to have this societal recognition that he was of the elite class, and wanted to be able to attend these fantastic parties and just become a part of the affluent society. By 1977, Archibald wanted to go straight and earn his money from an actual employer. Inevitably drawn to wealth, as we know, he would seek work as a butler in Scotland, believing that this would be his way into a prosperous life. Dressed in a butler uniform, impeccably creased and well-groomed, Archibald would change his name to Roy Fontaine and found domestic work at Lady Peggy Hudson's home on Scotland's border. Lady Hudson also employed a gardener for her large estate, a man by the name of David Wright. Unbeknownst, however, to Lady Hudson, her new butler, Roy Fontaine, and Mr. David Wright had been prison cellmates together in previous years. So once they meet again and realize they both have criminal backgrounds, obviously, and are working for the same wealthy woman, they begin to have a secret sexual affair. But they were also plotting against their employer, Lady Hudson. However, even though they were trying to plot some master plan, tensions were thick between the two of them, because David Wright was dead set on robbing the estate immediately, whereas Archibald was hesitant, telling David that they should wait for a better time, perhaps when more money was coming into the household. Archibald further tried explaining to David that they might have a better chance at getting more money by finding out the combination to the safe that was hidden in Lady Hudson's room. But David was so greedy and exceptionally impatient. One night, David would creep into Archibald's room, and he attempted to shoot him, but was so intoxicated that night that he missed Archibald's head and only shot the pillow. The following afternoon, David and Archibald would reconcile, which is crazy to me, but they did, and decided to go hunting for rabbits together. Archibald, quickly understanding that living with David would mean constant worry, felt that he had no choice but to kill his lover in this case. Archibald could be blackmailed by Wright with his fake name of Roy Fontaine, reveal that Archibald was a thief, and expose that they were having an affair and that he was a long-time criminal. So out on this rabbit hunting expedition, Archibald would wait until David's gun was not loaded. He would turn to his lover and shoot him in the face. And David Wright would be buried under a pile of rocks near a stream and quickly forgotten. Now at this time, Archibald thinks that he has essentially taken care of the threat to his employment. But only a week later, Lady Hudson would receive an unmarked letter in the mail. This letter was written anonymously, and it stated that her butler was not actually Roy Fontaine, but rather Archibald Hall, a convicted criminal. This letter went on to describe in detail what Archibald had been doing for nearly 30 years, which was stealing. Obviously, this is something that nobody would want to learn about somebody they've employed in their home. And so Archibald was immediately dismissed of his position, and although it has never been confirmed, Archibald believed that this letter was from David Wright, his last final goodbye being exactly what Archibald had feared all along, which was exposure. It was not long, though, after this that Archibald would get another job as a butler in Chelsea, London. His employers were wealthy and very old. The master of the home was Walter Scott-Elliot, at the age of 82 years old, and was so ill and weak that he was constantly taking medications that made him very drowsy and sometimes delusional. Master Scott-Elliot's wife, Dorothy, was also sickly, spending much time at nursing homes, rehabilitating essentially from various illnesses. Archibald would take advantage of Walter at every opportunity he could. In addition to fulfilling ttipycal butler duties, Archibald was also in charge of paying the bills that came to the home. And of course, Walter was only too happy to write out blank checks for Archibald to take care of. And of course, Archibald was only too happy to receive them as his own personal gift. And in this time, Archibald would acquire two accomplices by the name of Mary Coggle and Michael Kiddo. Archibald would devise a plan that would ensure wealth in his quality of life. Mary Coggle was a talented forger of credit cards, while Michael Kiddo worked as a petty thief. And to Archibald, both of these new witnesses would be invaluable to him as he surely and slowly stole the entire Scott-Elliot estate. However, Archibald was too hasty when it came to money. On December 8th of 1977, while Dorothy was away at a nursing home and Walter was passed out from sleeping pills, Archibald would sneak Kiddo into the home to take a look at the surroundings, and he was absolutely astounded at Archibald's find. Not only were the employers sick most of the time, but they again were also very old, and Kiddo estimated that they wouldn't be around much longer. Kiddo hinted that Archibald might even be mentioned in one of their wills, affording all the lifestyle he had been really hoping for. So Archibald and Kiddo prowled around the home for more than an hour before deciding to retire to Dorothy's room. Believing that Dorothy would be gone the next few days, Archibald was quite surprised when Dorothy actually arrived home the next morning. Dorothy was shocked to find her butler and a stranger in her bed and immediately began screaming. Alarmed at the racket she was making, Archibald smothered Dorothy with his hand and then suffocated her with a pillow. Walter would awaken from this screaming and wandered out of his room to investigate. And he was met by a sweaty and panicked Archibald, who assured Walter that Dorothy had only had a bit of a nightmare. And again, Walter is still very drowsy and kind of drugged from these sleeping pills, so he returned to his bedroom and went back to bed without any knowledge that his wife had just been murdered. The next morning, Archibald and Kiddo hauled Dorothy into a hired car, her face covered with a pillowcase. To fool Walter, Mary Goggle donned a fur wrap belonging to Dorothy and sat in the back seat. Walter watched from the upstairs window as Archibald climbed into the car carrying a large suitcase. Squinting, he saw his wife wearing her hat and her favorite fur. She was sitting behind the passenger's seat, but in the suitcase were all of Dorothy's precious jewels, necklaces, and rings. Walter was given another sleeping pill and joined the party in the car, believing his wife was sitting in the back seat next to him, but the real Dorothy was laying face down in the trunk. Archibald would dump Dorothy's body along the way, and Archibald would explain to Walter that he was simply getting rid of garbage. Driving 200 miles to Scotland, they finally stopped near Glen Athol, a snowy and deserted area. Walter protested as Archibald got out of the car and came around to the passenger seat. Walter did not understand why they had stopped and why he was being pulled out of the car in the very cold temperatures. Archibald would proceed to tie a scarf around Walter's neck and would first, Walter was under the impression that his butler was trying to take care of him and keep him warm by putting this scarf around him. That is until Archibald continued to tighten and tighten the knitted scarf, choking Walter. As you can imagine, he began struggling, and Archibald would bark out to Kiddo to get the spade in the back seat. He would proceed to hit Walter over the head with the spade, and Archibald watched as the old man's skull was beaten. So clearly this would also lead to the ending of Walter's life, and this duo of men would bury him in the nearby bushes. Now the trio of Archibald, Cockle, and Kiddo drove to a cottage in Carlisle, which Archibald had rented a month prior. As the three settled into this cottage, friendliness and camaraderie soon dissolved, turning into a huge shouting match. Mary Cockle had grown attached to the mink fur she had been wearing all morning and wanted to keep it, but Archibald would not allow it on the grounds that the fur could be identified by other persons. Cockle and Archibald argued for a while until Kiddo tried to intervene, but Cockle tried attacking him and was caught off guard by the hands of Archibald pushing her to the floor. And it was in this moment that the good-natured and pleasant butler turned into the psychopath he had always been, striking Mary Cockle over the head with a poker over and over until her face was unrecognizable, and then he would proceed to suffocate her with a pillow. So now they have another dead body on their hands, and they would dump her body into a stream not far from the cabin. Archibald and Kiddo would drive back to London, planning on raiding the Scott-Elliot home for money and other goods. While they were looting the estate, Donald, which was Archibald's brother, 17 years younger than him, came knocking on the door. When Donald heard about his brother's successful lifestyle, he was curious exactly how rich his brother had become. Archibald must have misunderstood Donald's intent, for Donald had only heard that Archibald was a butler for the wealthy. Archibald was under the impression that Donald was after his newly acquired loot at the Chelsea home. And without really thinking this through at all, Archibald and Kiddo acted out of fear and emotion and used chloroform to kill Donald. So here we are with yet another body, and they need somewhere to put this body, so they go ahead and rent or hire another vehicle. And they put Donald in the trunk of the car and drive back to Scotland. During this time, Mary Cockle's body had ended up being found on Christmas Day. Eyewitness accounts would lead to people suspicious of them and the rented car that they were driving. As Archibald and Kiddo were having dinner, police discovered the hired car. The hired car actually had false plates on it. Kiddo would be taken from the restaurant and did not resist arrest. However, Archibald was able to flee the scene and escaped in a cab, but would be apprehended at a roadblock not far from the hotel. So once he is in police custody, Archibald is asked about the dead body in the trunk. Obviously, that's something you can't miss. Before they could determine where the body had come from and who it was, Archibald asked for a glass of water. And finally realizing that he had been caught and could not escape from the 5 murders that he had committed, Archibald had every intention to kill himself with a pill that he was actually storing in his rectum. But this plan failed, and he would be quickly taken to a hospital for treatment, so he did not die. And then 2 days later, he would attempt to commit suicide yet again, but was unsuccessful. So during the investigation process and under interrogation, Archibald and Kiddo admitted their crimes, and ultimately were both tried in England and Scotland, receiving life sentences for their crimes. Kiddo had to serve a minimum of 15 years, but Archibald did not get off nearly as easy and had no opportunity for parole. During his time in prison, Archibald would confess to more crimes, including 2 more killings. He said that he had killed an American helicopter pilot and a garage worker, but refused to share any further details. During his incarceration, Archibald wrote an autobiography called A Perfect Gentleman, which was published in 1999. Archibald detailed his life, how he had been able to manipulate and use people, and of course, how to become a perfect gentleman. The seemingly well-mannered, proper gentleman and murderer, Archibald Hall, would die in prison in 2002 at the age of 78. I found something very interesting when I was researching this case, and in 2018, an engineer by the name of Ian Moore was interviewed as he recounted the time when his path crossed with Archibald. He revealed that he went on a road trip throughout Scotland with Archibald, completely unaware of the danger he faced. And it was at this time that the body of his brother Donald was in the trunk the entire time. During this interview, Ian explained how he became friends with Archibald after his family took the killer in their bed and breakfast when the Jaguar that Archibald had rented broke down on a road near their bed and breakfast in 1972. showed him kindness when he was stranded? That question remains unanswered. Years later, when Archibald went to jail, and during his time being incarcerated, he would even send Ian's mother Christmas cards because he had met her when he stayed at their bed and breakfast briefly. It was not an overnight stay, but he crossed their paths there when his car wasn't working. And so it's just fascinating that there is this person that has such a close connection to this killer and has no idea why his life and his family's life was spared. When Ian and his family found out about Archibald's crime spree, they learned this by reading reports in the paper. He said and felt like, how were we and why were we so lucky to escape death? Ian was quoted saying, "It was like coming face to face with Satan himself. It was a shock to the system." End quote. So that concludes the case of the monster butler, our Scottish serial killer Archibald Hall. Absolutely crazy. I feel like this could be a movie, and it probably is. I haven't looked it up, but I wouldn't be surprised. Please let me know what you think about this case.